The morning mist hung low over the encampment, shrouding the rows of white tents in a ghostly pallor. John J. Cutler tightened the worn strap of his musket and ran a gloved hand over the frayed edges of his uniform. The chill of early October crept through the fabric, biting at his skin, but he hardly noticed. Around him, the camp stirred with the slow rhythm of waking soldiers. "John," a voice whispered from across the tent. It was Thomas, his closest friend since enlistment. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink." John shook his head, his jaw tight. "I did, just thinking." He gazed at the faint line of smoke curling from the cook fires, where men huddled over small pots of coffee and hard biscuits. There was talk among the ranks, rumors of a Confederate patrol moving closer to their position. Each report sent a ripple of unease through the camp. John picked up a small, folded letter from his bunk. The ink had smudged from the morning dew, but the words were still clear. "Stay safe, my love. I wait for the day you return." He clutched it for a moment, feeling a knot in his chest. The war had already claimed too many. The drumbeat of the officer's call echoed across the field. Soldiers snapped to attention, the sound of boots crunching against frozen soil filling the quiet morning. Captain Reynolds approached, his expression grim. "Men," he began, voice steady yet heavy. "Intelligence reports suggest enemy scouts near our eastern ridge. You are to hold your positions. Any suspicious movement, report immediately." John's stomach tightened. Suspicion, after all, could be as dangerous as bullets. He glanced around at his fellow soldiers, some staring into the distance, hands tight on rifles, others quietly whispering prayers. Fear, he realized, had many faces. As the men dispersed to their assigned posts, John found himself patrolling the tree line, senses heightened. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made him flinch. The sun had barely risen, and yet the forest seemed to hold a darkness of its own, the kind that whispered of unseen eyes and quiet threats. Hours passed, marked only by the occasional shout or distant hoofbeat. John's mind wandered to the stories of men accused wrongly during the war. Spies, deserters, traitors. He forced the thought away, focusing instead on the rhythm of his patrol, the feel of the musket in his hands, the steady cadence of his own breath. It was late afternoon when the shadow appeared first, a lone figure moving cautiously along the ridge, barely visible among the trees. John's heart thumped, his instincts screaming both caution and urgency. He raised his rifle, voice trembling slightly. "Halt! Identify yourself!" The figure froze, then slowly raised hands in a gesture of surrender. John lowered his weapon slightly, confusion twisting his gut. The man's uniform was unfamiliar, patched and worn, but not Confederate. Not quite Union either. By the time John called out to report it, other soldiers had arrived. Tension hung thick in the air, charged with uncertainty. Orders were given to detain the man. His protests were drowned by suspicion, by fear sharpened to a blade. John's stomach sank. He recognized the danger now, not just from the enemy lurking beyond the trees, but from the uncertainty, the paranoia, the invisible lines of accusation that could turn a soldier into a traitor in an instant. As the evening fell, the campfires flickered against the growing darkness. John's thoughts were heavy. He had seen the first sign of what would become a cruel misunderstanding, a twist of fate with consequences none could have foreseen. And as the cold wind swept through the encampment, he could not shake the feeling that the true danger was not the enemy he could see, but the unseen one waiting just out of sight. The prisoner sat on the edge of the campfire light, shoulders hunched, eyes darting as if expecting a knife to appear from the shadows. John kept his distance, yet could not stop watching him. Every gesture seemed exaggerated, every sigh a potential confession. Captain Reynolds paced behind the prisoner, muttering under his breath, "We can't take chances, not with spies lurking everywhere. Not in these woods, not in this war." His gaze fell on John. "You detained him. You saw what he was wearing. What's your judgment?" John hesitated. The man was no spy. He felt it in his gut, in the way the man's hands shook. Not with malice, but fear. Yet the camp was tense. Rumors had a way of spreading faster than truth, and suspicion could kill just as easily as a bullet. "I don't think he's one of theirs," John finally said. "He doesn't move like a soldier. He doesn't speak with their tone. He's lost, I think." Reynolds' eyes narrowed. "Lost or clever, Cutler. War does not forgive mistakes. You know this." John swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility pressing down. He knew the officer was right. One misstep, one false assumption, and the consequences could be fatal. The night descended slowly, a thick velvet darkness pierced only by flickering campfires and the occasional hoot of an owl. John lay in his tent, unable to sleep. The letter from home burned a quiet hole in his pocket. He traced its edges with trembling fingers. The prisoner's quiet murmurs carried faintly through the night, sometimes a sigh, sometimes a low muttered word. John imagined the man's thoughts, the terror, the confusion, the awareness that a single accusation could seal his fate. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke. Shadows danced along the canvas walls of the tents, shaping themselves into faces John could almost recognize. Faces of comrades lost, of friends he might never see again. He rose, stepping into the chill night air, musket in hand. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting. He thought of the war, the endless parade of fear, courage, and mistakes that could not be undone. And as he gazed at the prisoner by the firelight, John felt an unfamiliar, gnawing helplessness. "You'll be all right," he whispered, though he knew it was a lie. The air carried only the sound of the wind and the distant calls of sentries. Dawn broke with a blood-tinged sky, the kind of red that made the soldiers uneasy before even a battle began. Word had come from a neighboring post. Enemy scouts reported in. Panic, swift and subtle, rippled through the camp. John watched as the prisoner was escorted to a makeshift guard post. Faces around him were tense, eyes darting, hands trembling. Accusations hung unspoken, carried in the lines of every jaw, the stiffness of every stance. Then it happened. A misunderstanding, a wrong word, a shadow mistaken for movement, set the officer's suspicion ablaze. Shouts, commands, the hurried movements of men convinced they were acting in defense of all. John ran toward them, shouting, trying to intervene. "Stop! He's not—" But his voice was drowned in the chaos. He saw the officer's hand fall sharply, heard the prisoner's protest cut short. The forest seemed to close in, swallowing the screams, the shouts, the desperate pleas. When it was over, silence fell. The wind moved through the trees, carrying only the faint echoes of a man who had never been a spy, of a soldier caught between duty and truth. John sank to the ground, hands covering his face. Rage, grief, and guilt collided in a storm he could not escape. Yet the war did not pause. The ridge remained, the enemy scouts still lurking, the forest still whispering of threats unseen. And John knew, with a chill certainty, that this single, tragic moment would haunt him for the rest of his days. A reminder that in war, the line between hero and victim could be thinner than a breath. As the sun rose fully, casting pale light on the encampment, John picked up his musket once more. The war waited for no man, and the truth, often, was buried beneath fear and suspicion. Somewhere, deep in the forest, the shadows held their secrets, and the story of John J. Cutler, the man who was never a spy, would echo quietly, a ghost of what might have been.